Brisk to me? No, not.
I'm an outsider, so I don't. I can only tell you what I've heard about it. I haven't practiced it. I've never learned in Brisk. So what I say is just just hearsay about it. The last 400 years has seen a tremendous emphasis on defining central concepts, one thing, which was always done, but a tremendous emphasis on defining concepts, testing out different definitions to see how they fit the way in which the Gemara's discussions go. And, thank you very much, and in particular building definitions out of theories which are based on very abstract concepts, where the distance between the theory itself and the concepts on the ground is quite great, which means you need long chains of intricate reasoning in order to get from the theories and central concepts to the actual data on the page, which offers the promise of very deep explanation of what's going on the page. Now, if you're looking for depth, looking for organization, it's very attractive. Some people are disturbed by the distance between the theory and the data on the page. They think it leaves room for a lot of distorted thinking, which doesn't show up because it can be disguised by clever deductions which protect yourself from refutation. So there's a certain amount of controversy about it. I spent a year with Rabbi Shalevsky, who was a Talmud of Nachum of the Nir, who kept very close to the text. That's my preference also, to be very close to the text. I'll give you one example of where Rabbi Shalevsky had a principle which I think the Briskers would ignore. Not to say that they're wrong, just to say it was a different approach. Let's say you have a difficult Rashi. Rashi says something, and it's not clear what he means. And someone suggests that Rashi means Q. But he would tell us, you must find Q explicitly in some Rishon. Otherwise, it's not acceptable to say that Rashi means Q. Because if you don't find the idea of Q somewhere in the corpus of the Rishonim, then you have no reason to think that in the whole corpus of the Rishonim, anybody ever thought of those terms. If you have no evidence that anyone in the corpus of Rishonim thought of those terms, then it's wrong to attribute it to Rashi. You're pushing too much of yourself into Rashi. You're recreating Rashi in your own image. You have reason to think that's what Rashi really meant. This would be a principle in history of ideas, which I have my tensions with that philosophy, but I think that it's a sign of caution, and it's a sign of responsibility to the meanings in the minds of the people who authored the text that you're dealing with. I'm not talking about what they have for breakfast. That's a stupid prejudice of certain academics. But I'm talking about in their published works. So Brisk is accused by the non-Briskers of building castles in the air, and the Briskers will say back, you're avoiding difficult issues, you're avoiding deep issues, and you're not dealing with them in a way that gives you a satisfying explanation. I heard shir from Rabbi Nachum Bersovis himself, was in his later years when he was unwell. I heard he had a Saturday night, it was a Shabbos shir, but he did Rashi particularly, and I heard a number of times when someone made a suggestion, this is what Rashi means, and he said, I would rather bleib shver, I would rather remain in doubt and difficulty than accept your answer. Because your answer is just too far from what Rashi says, too far from the words, too far from the intellectual context for me to take seriously. So I think that there's room for different types of scholarship, there's room for different types of analysis, and Brisk is like on that side of the issue. That's the best I can do. But you really should ask somebody who's learned that method and learned in their schools to to get.
Nonetheless, thank you very much, Rob.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Could you talk a little bit about the Jewish conception or relationship with how the months and the year corresponds with like astrological relations?
I know very little about the astrological material in Jewish sources. I will tell you, my wife and I last week, 10 days ago, were in Mitzvah Ramon for Shabbos, and we had the wonderful experience of being given a star course they have an institution there that gives lectures in very dark places with a nice telescope, and we sat out in the cold for 2 hours, and he was explaining to us the orbits and the constellations, and some of which I knew already, but he was very good at explaining it. And the beauty of the stars was just astonishing. And he made one remark about the zodiac, about the constellation of the month, of which I was totally unaware. As viewed from the Earth, the constellations, of which there are 12, one for each tribe, make a circuit around the Earth once a month. The constellation of the month is the one which is in the same place of the sky as the sun, which means you can't see it. It's blocked out by the sun. The one that is the constellation of the month is the one that's invisible that month. I thought that was fascinating. That was fascinating. I would have thought, since they rotate, maybe it's the first one to come up at night. It's the first one to make its appearance or something. But no, it's the one, or the one closest to the horizon. No, it's the one that's invisible. And my wife and I both took from that, and I asked somebody else about it, and he confirmed it, that the influence of the constellation comes through the sun to us. Now, the sun is the great organizer of the natural world, and that means the sign of the zodiac influences us by doing it through nature, not as apart from nature, not from modifying nature, but sort of propelling nature in a certain way, or infusing nature with a certain energy. That from learning that piece of astronomy opened up a very interesting ideas as to what the Jewish concept means. But what it means in detail, I've never studied. I don't know. I wish I could tell you more. Yeah.
Are there guiding principles from the Torah that you know of that could help a Jew find the right Hashkafah, the right Jewish outlook to have? Because there are different movements within the Orthodox Judaism. There are different groups and there's different ideas, and what principles from the Torah could I use to kind of guide me?
Okay, you've asked a profoundly ambiguous question.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm just pointing out this is part of the investigation, just to clarify your question. You've asked a profoundly ambiguous question. You asked what procedures, what guidance can you get from the Torah to find the correct Hashkafah. Now, maybe you meant the correct Hashkafah for me. Maybe you meant that. Or maybe you meant the correct Hashkafah, full stop. If you meant the latter, then the question is dead wrong. There's no such thing as the right Hashkafah. There'll be many different philosophical angles for understanding Torah, and each one will be incomplete, and each one will have some places of criticism, and will have some places of insight. So there is no such thing as the right Hashkafah. When you have a difference of opinion between great scholars, what we say is that each is a genuine part of the tradition, and each reveals an important part of the truth, and each will have certain limitations, and we would be greatly impoverished if we lost one of them. We have to have all of them. We study even the ones that were outvoted in the Sanhedrin. We study them also. So to talk about the right Hashkafah is just a mistake.
I think part of what I meant is, like, I think certain Hashkafahs sort of lead to either being more stringent or more lenient. And I want to know, like, does the Torah want me to be more stringent or more lenient? And, like, which, because there's different groups of Jews. Some Jews are much more lenient, some Jews are much more stringent.
So I think that's also a mistake. I remember early on, when because I was very close to my Rabbi for 47 years, and he was Hasidic, as I have become, and I remember I heard in his name a legal decision that was lenient. So I came to him and said, wow, I've discovered something. The Hasidim aren't always machmir. They aren't always stringent. Sometimes they're lenient. He laughed, right? No one has a program of being stringent. No such thing as a program of being stringent, nor of being lenient. There's a program of finding the truth. It could be, for some people, the way and the particular issues they choose to analyze, and the particular sources that they use, and their particular bent of mind, that 70% of their decisions are stringent, but there'll be another 30% that are lenient. There's no such thing. It would be anti-Torah, because it's anti-truth, to look always to be stringent. The truth isn't always with a stringent opinion. That's not the same as saying, I choose to be strict with myself. That's something else. I can be choosing to be strict with myself on the grounds that, although the strict law is lenient, I want to add to my service of God by doing something that's above and beyond what the strict law requires. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about analyzing what the strict law is. I'll give you an example. This is an unbelievable situation. Somebody wanted to know a Rav's opinion on certain questions of acceptable marital relations based on the way type of bleeding the woman has, right? So he was told, go and ask the rabbi's wife what he told her to do. Because if you ask him what to do, he may give you a lenient opinion on the grounds that he thinks you're not capable of doing what would be ideal. If you ask her, you'll find out what he really does. And that way you'll find out whether he's more stringent with himself, right? But that has nothing to do with the actual law. I'll give you another example. Here's another thing that people often ask. I heard that there's a rabbi who gives a hechsher, he gives a rabbinic certification on a restaurant, and he won't eat there. He won't eat at his own restaurant. What a hypocrite. That's dead wrong. That's dead wrong. There are different standards of kashrus. There's nothing wrong in many cases with having a more lenient standard for other people other than yourself. My Rebbe's brother only ate a meat that he personally supervised. That does not mean that he thought there were no kosher restaurants. He chose to always supervise the meat that he ate. So you have to distinguish between a program, a personal program of spiritual development, which leads you to always want to do, to remove any tiny semblance of doubt from what you do. For example, here's something else that I know it's a fairly widespread practice. Some people say, any meat on which a question was asked, I don't eat. A question was asked. That's the lifeblood of Judaism. You go to the rabbi, and he is a scholar, and he looks at the situation, and he tells you what the halacha is. And if he tells you that it's mutter, you won't eat it. The answer is, he's not saying there's anything wrong with the procedure. He's not saying there's anything wrong with the person who does it. I don't do it. I don't do anything that was questionable. I don't want to touch anything that was once questionable, even though the law requires it. So when you talk about wanting to know from the Torah's point of view, what is it better to be stringent, in terms of the law, which Hashkafah is right, which philosophy is right, the stringent Hashkafah, the lenient Hashkafah, both. If you have a Hashkafah to be stringent, or a Hashkafah to be lenient in law, they're both wrong. They're both wrong because they're not taking into account the truth of the matter.
Can a leniency be lechatchila?
Of course, because the stringency costs something, and it might be right to accept that cost.
Mm-hmm. And the inverse, like,
I'll give you an example. Rabbi Salanter was with some of his students. They were in a house. They were eating a meal there. Salanter had a way of washing his hands that was apparently quite elaborate. And here he washed his hands in the simplest possible way, sat down to eat. So his Talmidim, his disciples said to him, "Why did you wash your hands that way?" He said, "I'm not going to wash my hands in a stringent manner on the back of the servant girl who draws from the well. She's drawing the water. I'm going to use more water and make another trip to the well. I don't do that." So he's taking the lenient position about how to wash your hands to save the servant girl from extra effort. That's the chatchila. So life is complex. There are lots of dimensions to life.
It's a case-by-case basis.
A case-by-case basis, and you have to distinguish the law on the one hand from what you're doing for your personal development. There were some of Rishonim, the Rokeach, for example, and others who practiced sigufim. Sigufim is self-torture, rolling in the snow in the winter and that sort of thing. No one says that the halacha requires that. No one says that anybody who doesn't do it is missing in spirituality in any way. He was in a situation where it was important for him. That's all. These are very important things. Yeah.
What can one do to control bad thoughts or negative thoughts or inappropriate thoughts?
It's very, very important. I tell you, the story goes that when the Baal Shem Tov was dying, they asked him how, when you're gone, we'll be able to recognize someone who should be a Rebbe and we could follow. And he said, if you should ask him, what's the secret for controlling bad thoughts? And if he tells you that he knows, don't follow him. So it's a tough problem. It's a well-known tough problem. But I think in a certain way, it's made out to be too tough. There is an attitude that thoughts happen to you. You didn't ask for them. You didn't generate them. So they have to be something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent you. Your job is to deal with it. Now the question is how you deal with it appropriately when the thought is one that needs to be replaced. But it's not quite right. There is a way to prevent bad thoughts from coming to your mind, and that is to fill your mind with good thoughts. And I think you've probably already experienced a way to do that. If you're learning Torah with a chavrusa, I think it's very, very unlikely you'll be distracted by bad thoughts. For one thing, on the lowest possible level, the chavrusa is exquisitely competitive. You see, one day I read and I explain, and he shoots me down. And the next day he reads and he explains and I shoot him down. And when I'm reading and explaining, my mind is racing. If I say this, what will he say? Could he catch me over there? I'm going to say it that way. I'll leave that one out because that's kind of questionable. I'll go this way. It's all defensive and preparing for the next attack. It's very hard to become distracted by someone, a woman inappropriately dressed selling a car when you're thinking about where the next attack is coming from. It's very absorbing. Now, that shows you it's possible to block unwanted thoughts by filling your mind with the right thoughts. Okay, you're using, let's say, a fairly low psychological trick of competition, but if it works, it works. And if you can use other psychological techniques to fill your mind with the right thoughts, then that's a tremendous aid in blocking bad thoughts from coming in. Thoughts attack an empty mind. They can't attack a mind that's full. So now, for great scholars, for example, when they walk from place to place, they used to recite Mishnayos from memory. Well, you started from memory. You got to hold in your mind where you're up to, what does it mean, and of course you try to avoid the cars in the street. But in the meantime, your mind is going along with the Mishnayos. This Mishnah, and then the next chapter, and that's a way of avoiding those things. So there definitely are techniques which can help you avoid bad thoughts. Being in a certain environment, there's no question that being in the yeshiva environment itself has a tremendous difference between being in a public environment, being in a goyish environment, especially in a loose environment like current Western environments, which are so they're animalistic, they're bestial. Now, what happens when a bad thought does occur? Here, I think you should ask this question of many people because it's a psychological question. There is a famous paradox here. So I'm going to push it out of my mind. And push it out of my mind. I'm going to force it out of my mind. Well, of course, the whole time you're pushing it, you're involved in it, and you're thinking about it, aren't you? So that could be counterproductive. The Baal Shem Tov had a different approach. He was asked by a lumber merchant who said that when he's davening, he finds his mind drifting to the lumber in the warehouse, and when the river thaws from its ice in the spring, floating the shipments downstream and hiring the people to go with the logs. His mind is filled with this lumber business, and he's trying to daven, and it's definitely a bad distraction. So how can I get rid of my thoughts of the lumber? That's what he asked the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov said, don't get rid of them. Don't get rid of them. Just ask yourself, where do you get the lumber from? I get the lumber from the forest. And where does the forest come from? Forest comes from Kodesh Baruch Hu, from God. So instead of thinking, this thought is bad, and I have to push it out, think, this thought is like the lowest rung on a ladder. And my job is to construct some higher rungs and climb back up to where I'm supposed to be. Don't dismiss the thought, but use the thought as a stepping stone. This is real spiritual creativity. A spiritual life is a very creative life. You're solving deep, and call them psychological, to trivialize them. Psychology has become so based and trivial in general. But the psychology is the veneer, and the inner substance is a spiritual challenge, spiritual situation, and to use your ingenuity to turn it around. Our principle is that everything has its root in something holy. And the question is tracing it back to its root. And I've found, if you keep your eyes and ears open, listen to what people say, you can find echoes of your own philosophy in many different places. As you know, I'm Hasidic, but I found a number of places where the Chazon Ish said exquisitely Hasidic ideas. Where the Torah Tamima says Hasidic ideas. They're not Hasidic, but we would say the Hasidic movement has had an effect on the general Jewish population, on the general Jewish way of serving God, and then it shows up at certain times. The Chazon Ish, I heard this orally, I didn't see it written inside. The Chazon Ish asked, things split, yeshivas split into several different yeshivas, and community split, Hasidic community split. What's behind the split? What's driving the split? Sometimes, at least on the surface, the split will be accompanied by feelings. Each one will be saying that the other was making some kind of terrible mistake. And he said that what's driving it is this: you're living a Torah life, not only living it, but you believe in it, and you're sacrificing for it, and you're making a strain to be able to live it to the greatest of your ability. That requires tremendous motivation. You may need to believe it's true, really true, exclusively true. That anybody else, the right Hashkafah, I heard someone say about 15 minutes ago. And that means that if I'm pushing myself to 18-hour days because I want to support the right Hashkafah, if you disagree with me, you have to be wrong. You have to be wrong. Otherwise, if there are several different ways and each one's equally valid, so why am I fighting so hard for this one? Why am I pushing myself so hard? Now, this is a false thought. It's not a correct thought, but it's tracing the split, which can be expressed in political terms, in social terms, so forth and so on. Then you get people from Haaretzin who will make it, make it as animalistic as possible, right? Because they think we're all animals and they're trying to prove it by their behavior. He traces it back to something that's really holy. I'm dedicated to God. I want to do the best I can with my life for God. I want to express God in the world and bring God into the world. And then, as you apply it, it ends up with a political war. So, tracing it back to its source is a way of enabling you to step up from the immediacy of it and to try to connect it back to its source and find a purer expression of it. So this is one way to deal with the thoughts after they arrive. But I think it's also very important to try to find ways to preoccupy yourself with the good thoughts. I have a very close friend with whom I've been learning for more than 50 years. And many years ago, he himself made tapes of Mishnayos. He recorded his own voice saying Mishnayos. When he traveled, he would have that in his ears, and traveling by plane to various places, right? And he'd be listening to his own voice saying over the Mishnayos, so that he would be reviewing Mishnayos as he was going. That's a tremendous help. You know, you're sitting in a plane, you have the voice in your ears, you close your eyes, much, much less likely that foreign thoughts are going to enter your mind than if you're not occupied in that way. So that I think is something to say about it. As I said, this is a psychological question, and I always tell people, ask other people. Other people have different experience, different strategies. It's a good and important question. Yeah.
So, as someone, I think a lot of people here as well, but we've talked personally as well, you coming to become more, say, religious and learning about Judaism in a deeper way. There's a lot of things that you learn that you never knew before, much like a child would learn, that maybe obligate you, at least from an intellectual standpoint, to do certain things. And it can be a challenge sometimes if you take on too many of these things at once.
Absolutely.
And you can get into dangerous identity territory and crises and just psychological warfare with yourself, I guess, if you do things too fast. Whereas a child, maybe that's just what they know and what they learned and how their parents bring it up. So, how do you balance or determine what might be okay to take on, or at least how do you conceptualize not doing certain things that you know now that you didn't know before that obligate you to do something, but you're not ready to do that, so you feel kind of bad that you're not doing it? Was there a clear question?
100% clear. I used to talk about this all the time. Yeah, you have done very well. Your question is completely on the money, and it is a problem. You've expressed it, I think, extremely well. I used to, when we would have groups come in, I try to orient them. I would say, you have to think of yourself like an anthropologist. You're visiting a new culture. Now, you're doing this not just to write a paper or a book. You're genuinely exploring the world for insights on how to live. You're going to spend 3 weeks with this new culture, and you're going to go back home. What you do when you're together with the culture is to make observations, to note them down, to try to understand what you're seeing. And then, when you get back home, you have to ask yourself, well, what of this is applicable to my life? What will it do for my life? What procedures can I use to adopt it for my life? I told people that are here, and you're taking notes from the different shiurim, especially, there's this mitzvah and so on and so on. This is a book of desiderata, or a book of projects. I'm making a list of important projects. Because a project is something that I might get to next month or next year, and I'm going to put the projects in order of relevance, not in order of importance or value, order of relevance to me, to where I'm standing, so as to set out a program of development, but not, the Torah says this, I must do this now. No one expects that, including the creator of the universe, because he knows the limitations that you're operating under, and he knows that it's not practical to make sudden, ideal transformations. And this is built into, I would say, even the phraseology of the Rishonim when that's not their main subject. I'll give you 2 examples from the Rambam. You asked, how should I think about it, especially when I feel bad about not doing the right thing. I know that'll be the right thing. So, in chapter 5 of the Laws of Repentance, in the Rambam, Hilchos Tshuva, talking about free will, and he says, for at the very beginning of the chapter, every person has the power. He uses the word reshus, but the reshus there doesn't mean permission. He has the power to choose to walk on. How does he describe it? Let me get the exact words. Let me get the exact words right here. Yes, I'll put it back up. Here we go. Rishus kol adam nesunalo. Person has the power, if he wants, to incline himself to a good path and be a tzaddik, righteous. He has the power. And if he wants to incline himself to an evil path and be evil, he has the power. So Rabbi Meiselman asked me, well, what's the path doing over here? Who needs a path? Just tell me, he has the free will to be a tzaddik or free will to be a rasha. But you don't have that. You have the free will to incline, not climb on, run through, race through, 100-meter dash. No, you can incline yourself to a good path and become a tzaddik. A path is a gradual process. It's not an immediate decision. Rambam's talking about the power of free will. He says he's explicitly refusing to say that you have the power to be a tzaddik. The power to incline yourself to a path to become a tzaddik. Also, he says in Hilchos Deos, which is the laws of character traits, we have responsibilities for our character. And character traits are on like a continuum where there's too much, too little, and some kind of middle area that's really the best. So some people, as you probably know, can't spend any money at all. They can't spend $1. When they die in terribly impoverished circumstances, and in the mattress you find $250,000 in cash. That's a sickness. There are other people who spend everything. They can't hold on to any money. They don't make any discriminations. They just throw the money away. And suppose a person finds himself in one. Of course, the ideal is to be somewhere in the middle to make judicious decisions about what the money is worth spending on. He says if you find yourself incapable of spending any money at all, you can't let go of any money, the therapy is first move to the other extreme. First move to the other extreme, so as to break the hold of the first extreme on you. When you've broken that hold, then gravitate gradually to the middle. No one's telling you, you don't have the ability to go from the extreme to the middle. You can't do that. So, you start at one extreme, that's bad. Your first move is to go someplace else that's bad. And then go to the middle that's good. That's what your capabilities are. So this is the exact same thing I would say in general when you become aware of a whole set of responsibilities you didn't know about, and they're all valid, they're all legally binding, but you're not able to satisfy all of them at once. So then you have to set priorities, and the priorities are set in personal terms and psychological terms, and you need to have counsel in making these decisions. It's not just legal. It's not just legal. It's not to say, well, I have to work on A and B, but A is legally much more prominent than B is. That does not control the decision, because it may be that A will cripple you psychologically and just eliminate any process of further growth, whereas B will reinforce you and inspire you, and then you'll come to A 3 months from now and you'll be able to do it in a way that will foster your growth. You have to have a long-term perspective. So I think in the end, you have to sort of keep a split consciousness. On the one hand, you shouldn't feel guilty for not doing these things now, But on the other hand, you have to keep in your, and it's probably not too difficult, you have to keep in your mind, but I'm not in an ideal situation because I'm not doing these things now. And I have to grow into it. Like, for example, for you with your health. Suppose somebody told you, well, for your health, you need a complete overhaul of your diet. You need a whole exercise regimen. You need to put air purifiers on your house, and that sort of thing. You need to read certain types of books to improve your psychological state. You need all those things. You think, well, okay, let's see. To do that in 6 months would require about 42 hours a day, just doing that. It's not going to happen, right? So then you have to make priorities and do it gradually. Yeah. What's noch? Yeah.
Who was chasing Kayin in Bereshit? Was it animals or?
Who's what's he?
When after Kayin killed Hevel, Kayin was being chased by something.
He says that anyone who finds me will kill me. That's what he complained to God. Kol motzi yargeni.
He got like a sign.
No, so then God gave him a sign. God gave him a sign. Now I know the whole havdil between Torah and Tummy. Christians have the mark of Kain. But the Ramban has a very, very interesting shot. The Ramban says that when he went on a journey, that's where he was worried that he would be exposed, he would be endangered. On a journey, God would do a miracle for him to encourage him, to let him know that God was protecting him.
From what? From
He said, if I'm going to be a vagrant, a wanderer on the earth, someone's going to find me and kill me.
Someone?
Yeah, call it's anybody. I'll be because I committed murder, because I did.
Person?
Yeah.
What other people were alive?
Listen, Adam lived 930 years, and he had sons and daughters. It says in chapter 5 of Genesis that every one of them had sons and daughters, sons and daughters, sons and daughters, right? And if you're a mature age, you can have a new child every year. So if you live 900 years, you can have 900 children. So that's not the population. And then they also have children, and so the population grows, and there's no shortage of living space. There's no shortage of natural resources, just as there is today. No such shortage. Don't believe the nonsense they teach you that we're running out of stuff. That's absolute nonsense. So the population was growing tremendously, right? And, so at any rate, that's what he said. And here, people have the idea that Kayin is this criminal and evil, walking evil. The Torah doesn't take that point of view. Indeed, if you pay careful attention to the text, which nobody does, except our people, but the rest of the people just do their politics. God says to Kain, the pronouncement of his sentence is "No v'nod tiyi ba'aretz." No means moving all the time, and nod means having no fixed place. Roughly, means a wandering vagabond, right? And Kain says, "Can you not forgive my sin?" And then there's a discussion back and forth, and then it says he took up residence in Eretz Nod. Commentators point out the sentence was no and nod, and he took up residence in Eretz Nod, nod, right? So the no was left out. So the old tradition says God forgave half his sentence. He made a compromise with him, so the whole sentence wasn't carried out. So we don't look at him as this hopeless criminal who has to be destroyed and so forth and so on. No. God was willing to make a compromise with him, and he told him that I'll protect you from being randomly killed. When you're in a non-defensible position. And that was the sign of Kain. The sign of Kain was to protect him, not to mark him so other people would kill him or shun him or despise him and so forth and so on. Yeah.
I was in a shir, and the Rabbi just quickly mentioned something, like as a side note, and it sounded very interesting to me. I was wondering if you could elaborate. It's on the 4 qualities of geula, redemption in Litzias Mitzrayim.
You mean the 4 statements?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, the 4 leshonos, the 4 languages of redemption. We had it last week's parsha, yeah? Oh, that's it? That's what you wanted? Okay, so this is Shmosi?
The midbar?
Oh, no. Or any chumash. It doesn't- Thank you very much. Okay. This is I have something very interesting to say about this. Siva Shalom says something very, very fascinating here. So God says to Moses, "Tell the Jewish people that I have observed their sufferings, and I've resolved. I remember my covenant with the patriarchs, and tell them that I'm Hashem. I will take you out from under the sufferings of Egypt, and I will save you from their service, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments, and I will take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you." So there's 4 languages here. Now, the first question that arises is, what's the difference between the first and the second? The first is, I will take you out from under the sufferings of Egypt. And the second is, I will save you from their service. Isn't it the service, the slavery to the Egyptians that they're suffering? Isn't that what they're suffering? So why isn't that the same thing twice? Then it says redeem. It'll be interesting. Maybe we'll talk about what the redeem is different from those 2. And I will take you to be my people. And then it finishes, "Vitatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem motzi eschem mitachas selos Mitzrayim." You will know that I am Hashem, your God, who takes you out from under the sufferings of Egypt. God says, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and then you'll know that it's I who did A. I don't know. And you wouldn't know at the beginning. And why is A so important? A is somehow the most important of all of them. And that's why it's important that I did A and not B, C, and D. Why does it take time? And it's like So the Siva Shalom was the previous Slonimer Rebbe, a famous series of books, says, the first one, I take you out from the sufferings of Egypt, is I enable you to redefine yourselves. Instead of defining yourselves as slaves, you redefine yourself as a free person. This is very important. How you define yourself is not dependent on the circumstances in which you find yourself. There's a difference between a person who's forced to work and whose mentality is a slave versus a person who's forced to work and whose mentality is free. I'll give you a simple illustration of this. You probably all know about this. There are cases where people do crimes and they get put in jail and spend years in jail, and when they finally have done their time and they're freed, take the first opportunity to do another crime to get back into jail. They don't want to be free. They can't handle being free. They're not recidivists in terms of crime. It's not that they love crime so much they can't stop doing the crime and they end up back in jail. They want to be in jail. There was a mid-20th century psychologist named Erich Fromm who wrote a very famous book called Escape from Freedom, because freedom puts stress on your decision-making, on your self-development, your self-creativity. For some people, it's just too much to handle. They like to have it dictated to them. They want the structure given to them. There are no serious questions about what's going to be. I'm just going to do the best I can to survive. So, this first move, the Torah says, God says, I'm going to redefine you. You'll be free people facing power that stops you from exercising your freedom, rather than slaves whose work is being taken advantage of. Now that's before removing the work. This transformation taking place while they're still working. That's very difficult. That's very difficult. To redefine yourself in a new way. I'll give you an example. I wasn't happy studying history because I don't like just memorize facts. I like to figure things out. I had a teacher in college who made two very interesting remarks about history. And one was that in France, the feudal system, which was overthrown in the French Revolution in the 18th century, the feudal system was in position in France for 500 years, under essentially the same circumstances. So he asked, that was the question historians asked, what was different about the 18th century that the revolution took place in the 18th century rather than the 16th century or the 15th century? He said because at the beginning of the 18th century, there were certain philosophers who conceived of a different way of organizing society. Until that time, the feudal system was like the sun. If it's August in southern France and it is very hot and humid and you're very uncomfortable, you don't wish that the sun would go out. Because the sun goes out, it's death. It's okay, it's hot, I'll have to live with the hot. That's the attitude toward the feudal system. If you eliminate the feudal system, it'll be chaos. As bad as the feudalism was better than chaos. But then, new ideas arose that you could organize a system in a society in a different way with that alternate option of reorganizing society. Within a few decades, the feudal system was gone. So, this is the idea. Even under the feudal system, they were able to redefine their identities. No, it doesn't have to be this way. It could be different. Here, this I think is the way that Steve Shalom explains here. First move is to redefine your identity. Then I take you out of the actual servitude. Then I redeem you. Redemption in Hebrew always means going back to a prior reality. Redemption is never new. It's always a return. I think that, by the way, the English word redemption means that also. To redeem means to put it back where it was before. That means in a certain relationship with God that was not possessed before. And then I'll take you to my nation. And then when I take you to be my nation, you'll understand what it meant to redefine yourselves as free people. Because this is what the freedom is for. This is what the freedom is leading to. You couldn't have understood that from the first step alone of just redefining yourself as a free person. So that's just a little bit about the four languages of redemption. Yeah.
Do you know much about the censorship of the Gemara and this Vatican Gemara that I've heard about versus what we might have today?
There was a sefer, it was well known, it's called leshonos Shas, the missing things from the Talmud. And it was passed down through the generations. We always had it. We always knew what it said. And later editions, the 20th century, all those things were replaced into the Gemara. We knew that things were censored. We know where the Rambam was censored. We just kept it on the slide so that the authorities wouldn't be aware that we hadn't lost the information.
Right. Are there any implications on the way that things were interpreted as a result?
No.
Because
No.
we always knew.
No. Not as far as I know. Because I said we had this sefer called leshonos Shas.
Yeah.
It was available. Scholars who were doing the interpretation were aware of these things.
By who was that written?
I'm sorry, what?
Who did you say that was written by?
I think it was written by, but
Compiled, I guess.
I think it was compiled over the generations when these things happened. And by the way, I I remember when I was a student, and some of the people who were in our group gravitated to the conservative movement instead of being Orthodox. And one of them said, "Did you know that there are problems with the Talmudic text? Did you know that there have been differences and perhaps corruptions in the text? Are you aware of this deep scholarship?" So every page of the Talmud has at least 4 commentaries that correct the text. Every page. So they give me a break. And then in the back there are other commentaries which have other distinctions of the text. The Rambam often quotes a Gemara that we don't have, and the commentators say his text was different from us. Other Rishonim and Achronim quote Gemaras and Medrashim that we don't have. We were always aware of this. Indeed, the Gemara itself talks about this, because you'll have a record of a Mishnah, and the Amoraim will analyze the Mishnah, and they'll say this Mishnah is open to obvious objection. And the Gemara's conclusion will be Mishabashta. Mishabashta, if you look it up in the dictionary, which is a wrong move, will say it's mixed up. And what Mishabashta means is the transmission has been corrupted, and that's why it says something that's impossible to accept. And then they try to speculate where did the corruption occur and what was the original. And there are even debates about the kinds of mistakes it's plausible to attribute to mistakes of transmission, and what kinds of corrections are plausible. Rav and Rabbi have different standards for that. All this is already in the Gemara's text itself, not surprises to anybody. It's not revolutionary. The Orthodox aren't blind simpletons. It's just,
Do you know if this concept of corruption or not having the right things in certain places, from the outside perspective, do you think that that's used as an argument against Judaism ever?
I'm not quite hearing the words. And the argument that what?
Do you think that's used as an argument against Judaism ever? That I've heard that
You mean the argument would be that Judaism is not perfect?
it's corrupt.
Well, yeah, corrupt. Right. That's right. That's like when you have a 1% impurity, it's impure. Right? I mean, a friend of mine who lives in New York was dealing with someone who had tremendous complaints about the educational system in the Haredi world. This was like 20 years ago. And, this is bad, and that's bad, and this leads students so astray, and so on and so on. So he asked the guy, okay, have you done any study? What percentage of the students are being lost? He said, yes, I've done a study. 2% of the students are being lost. I said, yeah, really? So let me tell you, it's 98% successful. Is that really a failure? Failed system, because it's 98% successful, not 100% successful? Excuse me, that sounds to me like a tremendous success with weaknesses which would be good to correct. So you say it's corrupt. That means it's not 100% pure? Gotcha. Right. We know that. We're aware of that. The textual, and then some are quite dramatic. In the Yerushalmi, where it was much worse, the Gaon rewrote whole dapim of Gemara. Whole dapim of Gemara in Zroim. Right? We're quite aware of this. It's not a surprise to us. If someone thought you're going to have 100% purity, yeah. But, we have something like 15 letters. Of the more than 300,000 letters in the Chumash, we have about 15 letters that are questionable between different texts. The Christian scriptures have thousands. I saw one Christian scholar who said, we have thousands of variations of the text, but only about 50 touch matters of central dogma. 50! Thank you! Right? None of the letters touch any substantive thing at all. None. Zero. So we're pretty good at this. Yeah, but you got 15 letters missing. Oh, that's corrupt. Give me a break.
Yeah.
Give me a break. It's not serious. Ja, what's noch? Almost go.
So, why does one have to bring an asham for shivcha harufa? Seems kind of like a weird thing. Half servant, half free, and then she's betrothed, and then you violate her. I don't know. Seems kind of weird.
Let's see now. I'm trying to remember. Is she? I'm not quite sure, in what context to place the question. One way to ask it, and this way of asking it, I won't really be able to answer, and that is that 99.9% of the time, sacrifices cannot help you for a deliberate transgression. maybe say Mishtalech to that on Yom Kippur, but in terms of personal sacrifices, they're always for things which were done by accident. Culpable ignorance, culpable accident. If it was done on purpose, sacrifice won't help you. So you ask, well, why is this thing, which could be done on purpose, why would this qualify for a sacrifice? That would be an interesting question, but to answer that, you'd have to take like the 10 or 12 out of 16,000 and look at all of them together and try to find the common thread and see what made them available to be handled by a sacrifice. I don't know how to do that. And as far as I know, the responsibility is only on the man. Usually, with sexual crimes, it's an equal crime of the man and the woman together, and each bears responsibility individually for the crime. But here, I think because she's a shifcha, she's not a free agent. I think she's regarded as a victim. But I don't know. I don't know why this would. And then usually it's a chatas, and this is an asham. Asham is not the same as a chatas. Chatas I think, is always for shogeg. Don't you ever bring a chatas for something that's amazing. This an asham can be done. I don't know. It's a nice question. I really have no idea. Yeah, that's it. Okay, we have to go and teach you this. Very good.